I would now invite Amélie from the Association for the Environmental Health to share some of the questions that we've had. We've had quite a few within the Q&A tab and the chat box. So if we can kind of like summarize some of them so that we can have our panelists answer them. Well, thank you to all panelists, first and foremost. We will try to answer all the questions on the website, but considering that we are a little bit limited in time, we're only going to keep it to 2 or 3 questions for this one. So I'll put the first question in the chat. I think it's for all the panelists. Let me just put it up here. Okay, so the question is, what is the prevalence of people living with MCS by country, other than the estimated 0.5% or 3% diagnosed by physicians? For example, are countries such as India and China, which are sometimes experience high air pollution, more affected by these where air quality is considered better? Or do we have enough data yet to make this kind of observation?
There have been numerous studies done in Japan and Europe as well as North America. And when they look at people describing what sounds like multiple chemical sensitivities, it ranges from 9 to 16%. When it comes to so-called third world countries or China, however you want to categorize China, the studies aren't there, so we have no idea.
The mixture of chemical products. Hold on, I will put it in the chat so that way everyone can read it. Hold on a second. I will translate it. Hold on a second. The mixing of different chemicals in an indoor environment can lead to the emergence of other potentially more toxic pollutants, such as terpenes and ozone, which is in contact from formaldehyde and ultrafine particles. I think that will be for Mr. For all of the panelists. Mr.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That there's a mixture and a constant stirring of the pot. VOCs also, when they come together, they form tiny aerosols, and so by definition, they are actually also ultrafine particles and lead to the development of other larger particulate matter that we're more familiar with, like the 2.5 microns. So yeah, there's a constant soup. There's also something called surface chemistry, and the indoor environment relative to the same area outside has a much larger surface area. Our lungs have a large surface area. The more people in a room, the larger the surface area. If it's carpeted, there's a larger surface area, and that attracts the various pollutants to come together and enhances the chemical changes that occur.
I'll add to that as well. Maybe just it's related to the first question. I mean, we have a ton of data globally, and related to that question, it's really not possible to compare apples to apples. If you look at sort of our projects in China or India or places like this, buildings are not airtight. They're sieves, and so they do much worse in terms of particle matter. They do better in terms of chemicals. Whereas in Canada, the buildings are much more airtight. Particle matter issues are lower, and VOC issues are higher because, of course, airtight. So we're keeping all those chemicals in. There's a lot more layering, a lot more stuff that goes into North American homes. So we're not comparing apples to apples when we look at resulting health issues from, let's say, India, China, Europe, and North America, because the levels of airtightness are completely different, and the chemical content, sort of cocktails that form inside, are completely different. But your intuition is absolutely spot on. It's exactly why both my parents are doctors. They come from a family of doctors, and same thing. You go to the doctor and they give you a pill for one thing. They give you a pill for something else, and no one's telling you about what happens with those. When you take those two pills together, you get whole bunch of secondary and tertiary reactions. Same thing with particles. There's a term for them, sort of somewhat comically called Frankenstein particles, which are agglomeration of these little particles which will combine because they're chemically different and many times attracted to one another, form complex compounds that have completely unresearched effects. So do these things compound? 100%. We know they do. And there's science on that. What are the human effects? Nobody knows. No one's researched it.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to add to these two questions? Otherwise, I have another
Just
one.
one point. When again talking about places like China and India, they use solid fuels indoors to add to the pollution indoors. And what the studies actually show, according to the UN, or sorry, the World Health Organization, is that indoor air quality in those countries is the second leading cause of morbidity and mortality.
Thank you very much for this answer. I have one last question. It is in French. I'm going to put it in the chat.
What about asbestos in certain materials, residential homes? Should they be removed? How do I know if there are any? I will try to answer. This is Mr. Rose, and Mr. Bourassa might want to add to that. For those worried about asbestos in their homes, there are laboratories in Quebec that are specialized for the detection and the analysis of asbestos, if there is any in your home, and if there are levels of what are the levels, and is it dangerous? If you do have, in fact, asbestos in your home, the rule is, as long as you don't bother the asbestos, don't worry about it. But if you want to get rid of it, it's a process that is quite costly. So we really must go case by case. And yes, there are certain laboratories that can, in fact, do the sampling of those chemicals. Mr. Bourassa might want to segue off that. Yes, in fact, when we, back in the day, they used to give us sacks of asbestos to do arts and crafts. We are very far from that today. If asbestos is in a stable material, for example, in a tile, in a floor, we don't have any need to break it or disturb it. It's not going to change anything. What we want is that we have to have no asbestos in the air, the breathable air. If there's asbestos in the air, well, whether it be in the attic or in the insulating materials, and if we say, well, if the kids go play in the attic, well, that's a problem. And the second thing is, well, if the kids are playing in the attic where there's insulating products, there's another problem. It's not just the asbestos, it's letting the kids go up there. So the point is if there is asbestos, don't bother it. If it's in an outside shielding for the house, because that's what you have in Quebec, and you don't need to change that insulation product on the outside, leave it there. But effectively, like Mr. Owen was saying, when we need to disturb those materials, when we need to demolish or remove them, we have to be extremely vigilant. Same thing for insulation materials that we would we'd see in the previous furnaces, but there's less and less of those materials because through the previous decades we've been removing that product. So if it's in a stable material, don't touch it. That's my answer. Well, thank you very much for that elaboration. This is Valérie speaking. Well, thank you very much for all our panelists who have been extremely generous. And I've seen within the chat a lot of the comments that are extremely positive. I believe that the participants have appreciated your presence and the content that you've shared with everyone. I've also shared in the chat space a survey, a satisfaction survey on the event for today. And as Marc Lapointe mentioned, if you wish to contribute, participate in a workshop, a brainstorming workshop, or a think tank, you can also manifest your interest, give us your coordinates or your contact info, and EHAQ and Mr. Lapointe will contact you to organize that exchange workshop. So that's that. And now, to conclude, I would ask Ms. Peris to take the floor to do the closing remarks. And before I give her the floor, thank you very much to our participants and our panelists. Thank you so much for being present. It's been a real honor.
Thank you, Valerie. Before I end, I would thank all the participants who joined us today from different levels of government and from different disciplines, including health, education, industry, media, etc. And we have now come to the end of this webinar, and I hope that this has increased your knowledge on why indoor air quality is so important. Healthy air is a human right. We all have something in common, no matter who we are or where we come from or what we do or where we live. We all have to breathe. We all need clean air, and some of us cannot function without it, especially people experiencing multiple chemical sensitivities, the canaries in the coal mine. If there is one thing you take away from this webinar today, it is that our product choices impact indoor air quality. In the spaces where we live together, where we gather, and where we share the air. So why not choose the healthiest, least toxic options for yourself, your family, people who depend on healthy air and the environment, and generally for life? We have to think beyond ourselves. We have to consider the impact of our choices on our children, their future, and the environment. It is past time for change. We are late in acting. Let us start that action now. And I end here to your health, be well, and breathe well. Thank you for being with us today. I now pass it on to Michelle. Thank you.
Before I finish, I want to particularly thank the Société d'Adaptation du Québec for having partly funded this project, and BVR for their support in our project. And a very special thank you for all those who joined us today and those who will be watching the videos on our website. I want to also thank the intervention, our EHAQ team, Ms. Valérie and Vincent at the board for all the work that they've done in the organization of this webinar. Another Mr. Rafer, thank you for having spent the whole night awake for joining us because of the time zone difference. Well, we're very happy to do this and look for innovative solutions with you all. We were looking at we'll be sending you a survey for satisfaction. We hope that you will be able to contribute to our project and make it something that becomes a reality. And thank you again for everyone. Thank you.